Welcome to Real People, Real Stories podcast. I'm Rena, your host, and today I'm presenting you another real life story. My guest is Barry Maughan. Born in Australia, Barry became a journalist and spent many years living and working in Africa, broadcasting life-changing events to millions of people. He traveled extensively across the continent and throughout all 5 continents, witnessing history firsthand and sharing stories that shape the world. In this episode, we talk about his journey into journalism, his years living and reporting in Africa, and the life shaped by travel and global experiences. Hello, Barry.
Hello, Rita. It's good to be with you. Ask away, and I will share what I can about my career in life.
First of all, thank you, Barry, for joining, for being here, and for willing to share your life story. So let's start at the beginning. What drew you to journalism, and how did your career lead you from Australia to spending so many years in Africa?
Well, thank you, Rena. I really didn't have a choice because my whole life was around my father, who was a broadcaster. He taught music. He was in radio and television in Australia. And so I grew up kind of second nature to me to want to be in communications. I didn't know, obviously, at that young age what path, but I just knew that I loved being behind a microphone, even at a very early age, and watching my father enjoy it. I just figured, well, that would be a great career for me. Unfortunately, there was a divorce, and at 11, I left Australia and headed to Canada, and I was there for a year or so until my mother remarried, and I came to live in the United States. I'm still bitten by the communications bug. I attended radio and television school for a year, then realized that working at 250-watt dawn to dusk radio stations just wasn't going to cut it. So back to more education, Boston University, a BA in 1965, and then a master's in journalism management from Oklahoma State University in 1967. Bounced around after that in various communications jobs and decided, well, since I was then working for Benton and Bowles Advertising in New York City, selling such products as Crest toothpaste and honeycomb cereals and whatever, that I was not really happy with that, and my wife wasn't happy with her job. So we decided we didn't have children, so we'd head off to Europe. Before that, we had purchased a Volkswagen Combi bus from Germany and took a tramp steamer over to Antwerp, made our way to Wolfsburg, Germany, toured around Europe, had a wonderful time until it started to get cold. And we decided, well, maybe it would be time to go south, maybe Portugal or Spain to spend the winter. People said, nah, Morocco was a much better place. So we said, well, let's just take a trip around the Mediterranean littoral, and eventually ended up in Alexandria, Egypt, with the full intention of driving across the North African littoral to Morocco. But then a strange thing happened.
What's the strangest things that happen?
Well, it's funny. I always had given my mother saying that I was vaccinated with a gramophone needle. That means that I'll talk to anyone who stands still for a moment. On board the ship, I met a general from Egypt, and we struck up a fast friendship, and he kept inviting me back for more and more talks as we whiled away the hours on board the craft. And then as we were landing in Alexandria, Egypt, the last time we met, he handed me his card and said if I was ever in Cairo, then I should look him up. His name was Ibrahim El-Tahawi, which didn't mean anything to me, and it made even less when on his card it said President of the Young Men's Muslim Association. Anyway, I took the card, feeling never meet him again. And we offloaded our combi bus in Alexandria and decided then it was time to start making final plans to drive across North Africa to Morocco. Well, the day before we were due to start our journey to the Libyan border, a strange thing happened. A group of Libyan officers, led by Muammar Gaddafi, decided to stage a coup against King Idris and close the borders indefinitely. Well, that marked paid to all our plans to drive south or drive across North Africa to Morocco. Well, I had this card in my hand, and Ibrahim seemed like he was very, very sincere in wanting to meet us again. So we decided, well, we're in Alexandria. It would be awful if we turned tail and went back to Europe without going to meet or going to drive south to see the pyramids outside of Cairo. Excuse me. Well, that we did. And we then decided, well, let's just continue to head south a little bit further and look up Ibrahim El Tahawi. I showed up at his offices and was immediately, palatial offices, I might say, and I was immediately ushered into his office. And conversations I there had was with half of the Egyptian cabinet, the Minister of War, Mahmoud Fawzi, Minister of Education, this minister, that minister. And then I realized, well, president of Young Men's Muslim Association is not the equivalent of president of the Young Men's Christian Association here in the United States. Come to find out, additionally, that Ibrahim El Tahawi was the right hand general of Abdul Gamal Nasser, the president of Egypt. Thus, all the cabinet ministers in the office just lounging around, talking politics, economics. When I sat down, they didn't want to talk about that. They just wanted to talk about how much I wanted to see and how I liked their country and whatever. I whereupon said to the good general that we were having problems with finding a place to park our car or a van. And he picked up the phone and said, come on in. And Lieutenant Basri arrived. And before I knew it, I was listing all the things that my wife and I had ever wanted to see in and around Cairo, like the Sphinx, the Saqqara pyramids, the Cheops, and the Made Pyramids, Museum of Egypt, the Cairo Museum, the Egyptian play. We go on and on and on. Well, he then informed me that Lieutenant Basri would be picking us up at a place where he had found a safe place for our camper, and he would pick us up at 8 a.m. each morning in a air-conditioned limousine, and we would do everything that I'd ever wanted to do free on him. So for the next 10 days, it was like a magical carpet ride. We did everything we had ever wanted to do, and under the auspices of Ibrahim El Tahawi, and on a daily basis, Lieutenant Basri. So that went on, and this was during the war of attrition with Israel, so it was very difficult to move around the country, but he arranged first-class tickets for us to sail down the Nile to Aswan, the southernmost city in Egypt, on one of the military trains and put an armed guard on it. And eventually it arrived in Aswan, and we continued our journey out of Egypt, well on our way now to Ethiopia, where we had caught up with college friends of mine who said that we could stay with them until I got my feet on the ground after arriving in the capital, Addis Ababa.
Due to this political situation that you were in, that you described, were you not afraid to travel? Although I had the support from very powerful people back then, as I understand, it was personal trip. It was not work trip. So you didn't feel any fear or
Well, fear is what you make it, Marina. My wife was very, very good at the practical matters of the trip. She was fearless, and that's why my book is dedicated to her. But I also had a gift, and it was never meeting a stranger. And so when we arrived in Alexandria, I just sought out a place to park our camper, made friends with someone to watch it overnight, and then continually made friends along the way. I have a great sense, intuitive sense. And I have a sense of when to be careful and when not to be. And that's always held me in good stead. Like any situation, whether it be in any country around the world, you have to use your intuition and your perceptiveness to kind of sense when you could be in trouble. And I must say, we never ran into any of that, and very rarely the length of Africa. Maybe we were just lucky. But I also realize that if you meet people with an open hand and with an open mind, most people are going to treat you the same way. And time and time again, we got we got help from people that we didn't even know just by opening up and be friendly and being friendly, even though we really didn't know the languages, but by sign language and body language and whatever, just reaching out to these people and showing them that you had a good heart and you didn't mean them any harm. You always had to be very, very careful. You can't be naive, but most of the time this worked out very, very well for us. So yes, there was a war going on, and yes, there were tensions, but we made our way quite well in Egypt, through Sudan, and eventually to Ethiopia with very, very few mishaps.
Your travel sounds fascinating, and even after so many years, you can tell intriguing story and unusual circumstances that you traveled to Africa. You visit Africa for first time as a civilian, but when you took the decision to move into Africa and live there.
Well, no, actually, we got to Ethiopia in 1909. The serendipity, I would say it was a journey of serendipities. I arrived on the outskirts of Addis Ababa and turned on the radio, and there was a radio station, Radio Voice of the Gospel, broadcasting in English. And I said, that's what I'm trained to do. I'm a trained broadcaster. So I showed up, and the head of the newsroom, Ken Stewart, may rest in peace, took a chance on me, and suddenly I had a wonderful job of covering economics, politics, sports, whatever, from Radio Voice of the Gospel throughout the world. So I was there until 1972, and then we continued our journey south with our 1 year old at this point, who was born in Addis Ababa, and went the length of Africa in our combi bus and to Cape Agulhas, South Africa, whereupon I sold our camper. My wife went back to the United States while we awaited a second contract from Radio Voice of the Gospel. And in between times, I worked for Deutsche Welle, Voice of Germany in Cologne. And when I got the notice, we were flown back to Addis Ababa, and I began my second tour in that country until 1975, when I left for Australia, my homeland, but ultimately to New Zealand, where I worked as the national energy correspondent for a year until Radio Voice of America contacted me and hired me from New Zealand to work in the English to Africa service of the Voice of America. And I was there for 25 years. The last 5 years, I was chief of the service until I retired in 2005. 2000.
It's quite a story and quite a professional journey taking you to different continents. So from what you said, your very first broadcasting job was in Africa, actually.
Well, yeah, I had worked in smaller radio stations in the United States, 250-watt, very small stations, and I would say to anyone trying to get into the business that that's the best place to learn, because you learn to do news, broadcasts, you host remote programs, you do disc jockey work, you learn the whole business. So I was pretty versed in broadcasting before I showed up in Addis Ababa, hence my decision to look for the work at Radio Voice of the Gospel. But I really cut my teeth on international broadcasting and reporting, covering, I was only one of a handful of foreign based journalists in Ethiopia covering the entirety of the coup that eventually led to the ouster of Emperor Haile Selassie in September of 1974. I also covered the Wallow drought that killed hundreds of thousands of people in northern Ethiopia, and a lot of other stories that caught the attention of the world's press. And I've kind of made a name for myself, if you will, and was able to then move on to a New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation and uh, Voice of America in Washington. Left in 1975 because um, Radio Voice of the Gospel was nationalized and all foreign journalists were asked to leave the country. So I really didn't have a choice whether to stay on in Addis Ababa, but was happy to move on and continue my career in New Zealand and ultimately in Washington, D.C. until the year 2000 when I retired.
That's quite a time. So, from all this, the main takeaway is that if you would not decide to travel to Europe in your minivan, you would not have achieved the things you have achieved.
Amen, Rena. Amen. And, I would just say to people that, you know, you got to take a chance in life and you're not silly about it. My wife and we love to travel. We didn't have children and we were in jobs that we didn't particularly like. And therefore, it was a perfect synergy for us to do what we did. Of course, then being willing to follow where life leads you instead of being afraid of it, embracing it and taking a chance and being willing to meet people and just be
Yeah,
at one with the world. And I always say if people traveled more, Rena, in life, then we'd have far fewer problems because I think a lot of the situations that occur in the world is out of ignorance, being afraid of people just because you don't know much about them. And I think that that was one of the serendipities because both my son and daughter, who are now in their 50s and very, very successful in their careers, they grew up as minorities and they learned to live and meet people from around the world and to travel all over the world, not just to Africa and New Zealand and whatever, but we traveled to Thailand, to India, to Sri Lanka, all over. They rub shoulders with all kinds of situations, and they're much better at their jobs today because of that reality. So it was a wonderful experience, not just for my wife and I, but for our children. Ultimately, if someone asked me if I would do it again today, I would say no, because it wouldn't be as much of an adventure as it was back then. Consider this, Rena. We didn't have cell phones or mobiles. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have sat phones. We didn't have any of that. It was just a matter of, well, the rudimentary maps and looking up at the sun and making sure you were heading in the right direction and asking people. And so it was truly an adventure. And we're one of a few, I can say, that have traveled the length of the continent solo, overland, and at the second half of it from Addis Ababa to Cape Agulhas, South Africa, with a 1 year old on board who was never sick. And we had a fabulous time, and very, very few times did we feel any angst of any sort.
that is very good observation. That was I would ask you as well, because back then the time was different. Overall, it's not only about the mobile phones or the progress, also maybe thanks to these different time circumstances you were able to experience those adventures in some way, I would say. And also, I did understand you were not afraid to travel just alone with your wife and then with the child through the Africa from east to west, from south to north. But what about the wild animals roaming there in the nature? Like you tried to find the route to go around. How did you manage it?
Oh, not really. I mean, we decided that we do some meandering, but we had somewhat of a deadline to get down to South Africa. We didn't rush, but we just took the most direct route, of course, deviating to see some of the wonders that Africa has to offer, Mount Kilimanjaro and the Zambezi Falls on the border between what was then Rhodesia and Zambia. Lots of other, of course, the pyramids and Africa is so diverse and whatever. Look, people are people are people, and I truly believe because I've been to the continent since then that our if we ever encountered any tricky situations, it was never with the rank and file people, it was with the governments. Now, you mentioned the animals. You just ran across them. They were there. They didn't come up to the van. They were out there, but you just use your common sense and acted accordingly. There was one time where I was under the camper changing the oil, and I slid back out, and there I was about 6 feet face to face with a giraffe. Who, thought it was very curious of what was going on. And we had parked behind a hedge, and he was leaning over the hedge. And I came, like I said, 6 feet, but I didn't feel any fear. And he didn't show any animosity towards me. He was just curious. And so you don't overreact to those situations. You just lie there until, in this case, the animal gets bored and roams away. But I don't want to give the impression that we were surrounded by lions or hyenas or that. We saw them, but they were always off in the distance doing their own thing, and we were doing our own thing. I wouldn't recommend to anyone recklessly just wandering around, but you have to understand that we were in a camper. And so if we did run across things like python in one case, which was slithering around our camper, but we were inside. He couldn't get at us, we couldn't get at it. And so we just let him go on his way. The thing is, you just cannot overreact. You cannot panic. And that's when people get into trouble is they panic and they do foolish things. You've got to keep your head about you. But yes, did we see a lot of animals? Yes. Did any of them ever attack us? No, because by and large, when we came rumbling down the road, well, they wanted to stay away from us as much as we wanted them to stay away from us. But we did see a lot of animals, and that was one of the beauties. But when we felt like maybe they were near, then we stayed very close to the camper. And when we had the 1-year-old, he never left the camper. He always had his place in the well of the camper in the back, and that was his playpen, and he was very happy to stay there. So it's just a matter of keeping you cool, being friendly, and taking it day by day and not getting over your skis, as the young people like to say nowadays.
Before we finish, what's the one thing you'd like listeners to take away from today's conversation?
Well, I would like them to read my book because it's not a Mondo Carne type of book. What I would like people to get out of what I'm saying is go to Africa. Okay, you can go on safari. You can go in a cocoon where everything's laid on for you. But just go over and get a sense that this is not some ultra dangerous wild place with all these various horrible people and governments. No, most of these people are just like us. And that's the one thing I took away. I was out in the outback of Ethiopia with a translator, and I met with this family living in a very tiny dwelling. And I asked them through the interpreter what they wanted out of life. And they said 3 square meals on the table each day. They wanted a better life for their children. They wanted less government intrusion in their life, and they didn't want their son being shipped off to some foreign place to fight and die in a war. Duh, isn't that what we all want? We might have a different ethnicity, we might have a different culture, we might have a different economic situation, but we're all of the same. You scratch the surface, and we all want the same things for ourselves and for our children. And that's what I got out of this, that no matter where we roamed on the continent, then this is what we basically encountered. And that's why I'd like people, yeah, forget about the price of the book, but it's going to be well worth it. Because if you take away from the book what I want you to, then it's going to bring about a better understanding. Yes, things change. And I can't say, not having been through 20 or 30 years, that things are all hunky-dory. And no, but I'll guarantee you that the rank and file people are still good. And that's what I want people to get from my book and from our travels. Is that wherever you go in the world, as long as you're smart and intelligent and careful, then you can get off from travel and from travel.
Thank you, Barry, for sharing your story